Good morning, everybody. We're going to continue on with our look at LINQ, Language Integrated Query. And we'll be looking at some more of our examples out of our workbook. I just wanted to again point out amongst the notes that I had mentioned in a previous class, such as this one, which does a language integrated query demo. I discuss a bit or list out the major clauses that are used with the query syntax version of LINQ. And I do have there a little bit of a interactive description of it that shows when you hover over all the different things what it's about, what each part or item is about. We're going to start out with today looking at doing order bys, and we're going to be bringing in order bys, wheres, and even get into grouping today. So that's going to cover a lot of the remaining ground for learning about language integrated queries. The other thing that I want to just sort of draw your attention to is the fact that in your workbook, there will be two items, practice part 1 and practice part 2. So you can be looking at those in LINQPad. So in practice part 1, I give you a bunch of questions. I want you to actually put the answers in separate LINQPad queries. Don't try to use LINQPad as a place to put all of the answers for each of these. Use a separate query for each of these, because when you execute it, you're kind of executing. It's better to be able to execute and have one particular question answered. If you try to put all of them in and you do them as expressions, then you're going to get compile errors. It'll only work if you select and highlight them. So do them in separate LINQPad queries. So giving you a bunch of things that you could even get started on right away. And practice part 2 has similar kinds of questions that I want you to work on. By the way, are there any questions that you might have in regard to the material we've covered so far? I just want to let you know that if you do have questions, you can be putting them into the chat, and it's okay if we go back to some previous items. Okay, let's take a little bit of a look at the example number 11. So here's where we're doing some sorting. And sorting is done via the order by. So the order by clause allows me to sort, and by default it'll be in ascending order, but we can make it go in descending order. So when we look at all of the categories, if we get them sorted by the category name, this is the order we get them in. And if we do it in descending order, we would get them in the reverse. And you can sort by more than one particular item. You can sort by multiple items, as in example 12, where we order by, as we look for people in the employees, we can order by the person dot last name and then do a comma, and then we're sorting by first name within last name, so that if we had any duplicate last names, then we would have that the first name underneath it. Let's look at another bit of sorting. And by the way, the other thing too is that I want you to really get out of this is that what we're doing is we're oftentimes taking some general kind of a problem and expressing, how we would get that information out. So if the problem was looking up the category names in alphabetical order, I would be going through each row in the categories, sorting them by the category name, and then just selecting the category name. So as you're looking at your particular problem, that's the thing that's going to be guiding you. When I show you the order by here, I'm just showing you the syntax. And there's, not too much to say about the syntax. Bang, there it is. But it's all about, understanding the problem, what you're looking for. So in question number 12, or example number 12, our problem was to look up the employees sorted by last name, then first name. And we wanted to show the last and first name as distinct properties. So that's why my query took the shape that it did. So it was being very explicit about how it wanted the sorting to occur. And it was also being very explicit about the last and the first names being distinct properties. By the way, does anybody remember what I called it when I said what the terminology was for when I go and say select new, when I use the new keyword and then just do open and closing curly parentheses with properties put in? What kind of a type do we call that? That's right, an anonymous type. Correct. So it's anonymous because we haven't declared that type or declared that class elsewhere. So that's one of the nice things that we can do is we can create these data types on the fly. Now, as we move on from exploring and playing around in LINQPad and start putting it into our actual application, we'll turn around and we'll probably want to put in some kind of data type that is concrete. So a concrete data type is one that is based specifically on a class that you can instantiate. So a little bit extra terminology there. Well, let's look at this sorting problem. Here we wanted to get the products and we wanted to display the name, the category, and the unit price for each product. But we wanted to have the results sorted alphabetically by category. And then we wanted to have it in descending order by the unit price. So what I do is I do my order by. So I'm starting by products, which is actually going to be giving me a flat list of a result. And because each product belongs to one and only one category. So that's the connection between those two. And I'll order by the category items category name in ascending order, then by the item's unit price in descending order. So you can mix up your ascending and descending. And if you don't specify ascending, that's the default for that part. But I can't remember offhand if you. Yeah, I think it's generally speaking, if you're mixing ascending and descending, be explicit about it. That's a good rule of thumb. So when I look at the results that come from this, I'll see, okay, here's all my beverages. And I have them from the most expensive to the least expensive. Sasquatch Ale is a simple $14 per unit. Laughing Lumberjack Lager is 14. But this particular coffee is kind of expensive, and I have no idea what this is. Likewise, if I go to the condiments, veggie spread is pretty expensive compared to in the condiments section of things, compared to the original Frankfurter Grünsube, whatever that is. So oftentimes when you're looking for particular kinds of information, you want it organized a certain way. That's what all our sorting is about. Oh, it's wine. Yeah, I figured it was some kind of wine. But that was, that would have been even a guess for me that it was a wine. It sounded French, right? That looks French. If it's French, it's wine. Probably. You can tell I'm not really a connoisseur of the fine foods and all that sort of stuff. Well, let's take a little bit of a look at the next kind of a topic, which is one of grouping. And when I was, yeah, I think I'll hold off on this a little bit. This one a little bit, but when I was doing the grouping topic in class, I had this set of playing cards, and they were big playing cards, like they were about 3 inches by 8 inches, and I put little magnets on them, and I would stick them onto the whiteboard, and I would basically have you guys go and say, okay, group these by different ways. And so I would put up a bunch of cards and I'd say, okay, you group these by color. And then another one, I would say, you group them by the number that they have. And then the next group, I would say, you group them by the suit of the playing card. And the thing about grouping them is that once you group them, essentially what you're doing is you're taking a list of things and you're putting them into a bunch of lists. The first example that I have on grouping is this one right here, which is customers grouped by country. So if I think of just all of the customers, if I just think of customers and the fact that for each customer, they have an address and in that address there's a country. If I go to group these customers by country, what I'm going to effectively have is the country is going to be the key, and then for that particular country, I'm going to have a whole bunch of customers. So grouping is a matter of taking the items and organizing them into little subgroups or into little sub lists of items. Let me show you what the results of this particular query is, and then I'll get into looking at the actual grammar of this. So when I do the sorting of all the company names and the contact names for our customers grouped by the country, what I wind up seeing as a result is a list of customers or customer groupings. So what I've got is effectively the notion of here's the country, here's all the customers. So the focus is still on the notion that I want to wind up with lists of customers. So if I am starting with customers, when I group them, I get a bunch of smaller lists of customers. That's the idea. So here's all the customers for Argentina. And then for Austria, I have these customers. For Belgium, I have these customers. So instead of one long list, I've got a bunch of smaller lists. And the thing that I'm grouping by can be thought of as effectively the key. It's the distinct item for or I shouldn't even say that. It's the common item. Maybe that's a better way of saying it. It's the common item for all of these customers. So all of these customers here are in Argentina. I know I'm probably saying this, and it's sounding like a lot of obvious stuff. Yes, that probably makes sense and all of that. But you need to realize that in thinking about this and dwelling upon what the results look like and trying to describe it, I want you to take that kind of a English description of what's going on and tie it back to how our code is generating that. So I want to actually select a little subset of my code, which looks at just the grouping. So I'm going to say from each row in customers. So row is a customer, customers is a whole bunch of them. So each row is a single one. I want to group that row by the addresses country, whatever that customer's address country is. That in itself is a complete LINQ query because it results in something like this. What I have is an I ordered queryable of a grouping that has a string as the key and has the customers as the collection of items. So first of all, when I group them, what I get is a grouping. A grouping is something that has a key. I just Put a little box around that. It has a key, that's my string. Draw my lines quite nice here. And then it has a collection. And so here's my collection right here. In other words, here's all the customers. It still kind of refers to this whole item as a grouping. So when I talk about, there's a grouping, there's this one for Argentina, there's this one for Austria, there is this one here for Belgium. And effectively, you can think of a group as being just like a list. Effectively, it's a list of customer, but it's a list that has an extra property called a key that identifies that common characteristic for all of these. Now, I'm pretty sure that you guys have never coded your own list class. We've used the list of T, but we haven't really looked too much as to how it might be working on the inside. But if you'd gotten into that whole notion, or if you just simply recognize the notion that a list of T, that's just simply a class, your grouping is it would be also like a class that has an extra property on it called key. But the next thing to really be aware of or to notice about this is that what you have are a whole bunch of groupings. It's not just one grouping. It's not one group. When you group stuff, you don't get back just one group. You potentially get back many groups. So that whole aspect becomes important because what we've got is something called an I-ordered queryable of grouping. There's 21 items inside of that. So that itself, the final result set of doing a group by, is effectively getting a collection of groups where each group has a collection of items in the group. Or you might even think of it in more general terms as almost being like a list of lists. You can have a whole bunch of listed items in lists. So my aim with this is to just sort of get you thinking about that whole aspect of the of visualizing what's going on. Let me grab a quick little screenshot for that. So What I want to do then is just sort of break down what's happening in my syntax. So when I have my from row and customers, I identify what I am wanting to group. So I'm going to have individual rows, and I want to take those individual rows and lump a bunch of them together. How do I want to lump them? What characteristic is going to be common in order to do that lumping together? Well, it's going to be based upon each of those particular rows having the same address country. Okay, that's good. That was that result that I saw down there. And you remember that when I went and ran that, I had this property called key. That was the thing that I sorted by. So that was how I did the sorting. That's the key. And then what I effectively said was I want to take all of that, all of this final result, and I want to call this final result customers by country. So when I go and look at that, and I look at customers by country, that is effectively the name for each item that I would have in that previous list. So when I went, it's kind of like creating a new name for instead of we're looking at rows, we're looking at groups of rows. Each group of the row is going to be called customers by country. So you can think of lines 2 to 4 as saying from customers by country out of all of the customers. So customers by country becomes the new what that we are working with, that we have. So when I do a select new, I'm doing it with that customers by country. And I started out by grabbing the key, but instead of calling it key, I gave it the name country for the property. So this new anonymous type I'm going to have is going to have a property called country, and that's going to be whatever that key value was. And then the thing to know about customers by country, it's a group of customers. That means it has numerous customers in there. It is a collection as well. That is a collection, and so I can query it, and I can say from each piece of data in that customers by country, I'll get the company name and the contact name. So in terms of how the I grouping is represented as a collection, I can effectively say that as a collection, it's a bunch of customer objects, because I was looking for out of the customers table, and I was grouping, taking individual customers and organizing them into different groups based on the country. That means that this customers by country is a collection. That actually is a group of items. And since it's a group of items, I can query it. I can say, okay, let's look at each of the individual customers. So the data type for my data variable is customer. And as I look at each customer, when I look at that customer, I'm getting the company name and the contact name. once again, it's important to feel somewhat comfortable working with objects instead of just thinking in terms of primitives. Notice I haven't really said anything about strings, ints, floats, doubles, anything like that. I'm talking in these higher concepts of these objects. And then as I deal with groups of these objects or collections of these objects, I have different kinds of collections. So, for example, even when I think of the customers, because I'm basically getting that from the database, that thing right there is a DB set of customer. Do you remember typing that kind of a thing into your context class? You know, public class new Westwind context inherits from DB context, and then it has a property for all of the customers. And I would have DB set customer, and I would call that customers, right? With its get and its set. But the essential thing out of all of that was the simple fact that its data type was a DB set of something. So it's like a list. It's a collection. And an I grouping is also a kind of a collection. We're running into the notion that there's different ways we can put things together and have them work with certain characteristics or have some unique characteristics. The unique characteristic of a list of T is the fact that it is an ordered list of items. That is, when you add to the list, you append to the end of the list. A DB set of T is simply a database set of rows for a table, some kind of table that we're pulling out of the database. So it has its own extra little properties. When I have a grouping of T key, comma T item, that is effectively a bunch of items with a common key value. Or if you've ever gone to the grocery store, anybody ever go to the grocery store? Just, you know, somebody, just one. All I need is one person to give me a thumbs up on that. You never heard of that. You always order pizza, and they deliver it to the door. So okay, but if you've ever gone to the grocery store and you've bought stuff, when you go to pay for things, what do you wind up finding yourself in? You wind up finding yourself in a queue. So what is a queue? That is a collection of items where the first one in the queue is the first one out of the queue. So you're in a line. If you're first in line, you're going to be the first one who gets chosen. If you're the fifth one in line, you're going to be the fifth one that gets through the list. It's what we would call a FIFO, first in, first out, kind of an organization. So the queue actually has, as a class, as a data type, has two properties on it. One is called NQ. So that means when you add to the queue, where does it get added? You know, when you see a line at the checkout, where do you go? You go to the back of the line. Now, I know some of you maybe like, try to sneak up into the front or into the middle and all that, but people look at you dirty. Like, don't do that. Some of them might even say that, like, get to the back of the line. That's different from, and then the DQ. The DQ is pulling the person, pulling the next person out of the line. You pull right from whoever's at the front of the line, first in, first out. Then you have a different kind of a situation. So you bachelor guys might be a little bit familiar with this. So a stack. So what happens when you're done eating, guys? You make your lunch. You're done eating. What do you do with the dishes? You wash them, right? No, you don't wash them. You just put them you just put them in a stack. You just put it's my roommate. That's always a good one to call out, isn't it? The roommate. No, you just go and you put it you put it down on the counter, and then you get a clean one out of the cupboard, and then for the next meal. And then when you're done, what do you do with it? You put it on top of the other plate. So eventually, of course, you run out of plates and you have to wash them, or you go out and buy paper plates, but we're going to ignore that scenario. You decide to wash the plates because you can't afford paper plates. You're a student. You don't have that kind of money to throw around. So you start washing the dishes, and what do? You can take them off of the top. So with a stack, it's the last in, last out, or LIFO kind of a organization of that collection. And so there'll be a couple of properties onto there. So there'll be a push property, which basically puts it on top of the stack, and there'll be a pop property, which will pull it off of the stack. All of these are different kinds of collections, and they have different extra little characteristics that let us do different stuff in. Was it last in, last out? Yeah, I did that wrong. Now I have to backtrack. When you're doing it, drawing on the screen, last in, first out. Thank you. Thank you, Graham. So LIFO, last in, first out. And you have the push, which goes and puts it in or onto the stack. And then you have a pop, which pulls it off of the stack. All of these are different examples of what we call collections. And they exist inside of the system.collections.generics namespace. All of this is to say that if you familiarize yourself with some of these general purpose types of collections and understand some of the characteristics of them, you'll be better positioned to know how to use them. And that's true for our grouping, which is one of the things that we're working with in our particular example with LINQ doing group buys. So you learn about, well, what is a grouping of T key T item, or an I grouping of T key T item? You can Google that and you can see, oh, okay, that has a property on it. It has a property called key. which was the identifying of that common piece of information. But it is still a collection, which means that we can query it. Questions or comments? Did that discussion suddenly get a lot more condensed in terms of the material that was in there? You know, we started talking out about sorting. Okay, that seemed pretty good. Then we started talking about grouping, and then poof, it suddenly got into a lot of heavy thoughts and heavy ideas. Let me go and throw that image in there, because that would be a good little thing for you to think about. Yeah, that's why I'm using LinkPad. That's very true. LinkPad makes it pretty easy to visualize all of the stuff that's going on. So because that's often the challenge, isn't it? Like you're learning something new code wise, and what you're learning is kind of like the grammar of the code, but you need to have a way to visualize what's going on. And when you're learning another human language, right? When you've got concrete things like you learn the French word for door or the French word for chair or something like that, you've got a picture in your mind. This is what a door is. This is what a chair is, and it's easy to figure that out. But then if you start talking about more abstract kind of ideas, that's when it gets a little bit dicier to understand that, how to say that particular thing in a foreign language. So having some way to visualize it is really good. LinkPad does that for us. So let's consider another situation. Let's look at the employees grouped by the employee region. So here's the problem. I want to display the employees, but I want to group them by the region in which they live. Each employee, has an address, and so they live within a particular region. What I want is the employee's first name, last name, and job title, as well as the name of the region that they live in. So from the person and employees, I group the person by the address region into something that I'll call employee groups, and then I'll select the new, and I'll have the region as the key, so that, remember, whatever you've got as the by portion is what the key is. So whatever is in your by part of your syntax is the key. And then employee groups is simply a whole bunch of employees. So you're putting a whole bunch of employees into a particular group. And so from that staff in that employee groups, you can get each staff member's name, job title, city, and country. Actually, this one didn't ask for city and country, so I threw in a couple extra pieces of information. So let's look at the result. Turns out I've got 4 people that are not in a particular region because they're in London, but I've got 5 people that are in Washington. Seattle, Washington, Tacoma, Washington, Kirkland, Washington, Redmond, Washington, Seattle, Washington. Let's take a look at just one more. This time, what I want us to do is I want us to consider the ERD. So imagine that what I want to have are products grouped by the supplier's country. So for products, what I want to show is the product name, the quantity per unit, and the unit price. And I maybe also want to show the company name for that product. But all of my grouping appears by the country. So when you're looking at a particular problem statement and you're wanting to compare it to your entity relationship diagram, the thing to do is to start identifying the pieces from your problem statement that line up with the stuff that you've got in the diagram and decide where you're going to start your query from. Here I've decided to start it from products. Well, let's actually look at the problem statement as well. So the problem statement itself, and let me bring back this and just put it underneath here. So the problem statement itself was show all the products grouped by the supplier's country. I want to see the name of the product, the quantity per unit, and the unit price, as well as the company name of the supplier. So what did I do? I went and I said inside of here, shrink that just a little bit. So what I wound up doing was I said, okay, this is the information that they wanted to see. They wanted to see the name of the product, quantity per unit, unit price, company name. So I identified all of those. And I wanted to have them grouped by the supplier's country. So that's where I went and did that bit of grouping there. So you're just mapping the problem statement onto the ERD. Because as you look at the ERD, you're going to have a better appreciation of the data types of the objects that you're working from. And so you identify that since each product has a single supplier who has a single address, it's good to start from the products thing, because going into each of these different pieces, it's just a matter of saying .suppliers .company name or .suppliers .address .country. That's how you can dive into it. So with that being established, what am I looking at? Well, so from items in products, I'm going to group the items by the supplier address country, the item supplier address country. And I'll just give a name to it, product by supplier address country. Sometimes coming up with a name is a little bit tough, so maybe it'll be a little bit wordy. That's okay. So then I'm going to say select new. By the way, I'm probably going to want to come up with a class name later. So I just make a little comment. I'm probably want to come up with a class. And then the country is the key of that particular item. And the item that we sell is that thing in that collection, that I grouping. So that thing is a product because we were doing products. So this is a group of products. So the thing is a product, and I'll select a new item where I have the product name, the quantity per unit, price, and supplier. Okay, here's what we're going to do. In your workbook is so this was 15A. In your workbook is 15B. Show all the products grouped by the supplier's company name and country. That was the problem statement. And take a little look at this, and also examine and look at it vis-a-vis the ERD. So again, it's the ERD, but this time we've got grouping by 2 items. We'll come back from a break in 10 minutes, and we'll discuss problem 15B. See you guys in 10 minutes. Okay, we're back from the break. And what I wanted to point out, the big thing to note out of this particular example is that when we do grouping, we don't have to group by just a primitive piece of information. So we don't have to group by a string or something like that. We can actually do our grouping based on objects. So if we combine a bunch of different properties together for our grouping, so in this one, we want to group by the supplier's company name and the country. What I can do is I can create an anonymous type where it has the company name and then the country. And what happens with that, in this particular anonymous type, I'm doing it in a simplified way. By the way, when you create the anonymous type, you're identifying properties. When we do an anonymous type right here, what I've done is I've given explicit property names, whereas in this one here, what I'm getting are implicit property names. The names of the properties are not given. So what happens is that the name that is used is the name of the value item that we're extracting. So in this case, because I'm looking specifically at the company name and the country, that means when I look at the key has a property of company name, country. So it's still the same principle of grouping. It's just that in this particular example, we are grouping by a by an object. So basically a more complex kind of a grouping that we're wanting to achieve. And so you can see even right here when it goes and it identifies that whole key. Sorry, I should undo that. That was the hovering over company name. I did some sorting as well. So that's what the company name is there. That's the sorting. So let me go and grab a screenshot of that. And let's see what we get for the result. So our result is, here's the supplier from France, supplier from the USA, supplier from Spain, all the different places like that. So what I'm discovering out of this is here's all the stuff that we sell, and this is where it's from. This is where all the stuff comes from. In the next problem, which is the products sold by the customer country, show all the sold products grouped by the customer's country. We want to have the product name and the customer's company name. What we're doing is we're kind of looking at it from a different end. Here's 15B is here's all the products and where they originate from. Here's all the products and where they wind up at. So Finland, for example, gets all of these kinds of products. USA gets these kinds of products. So USA gets a lot more kinds, a lot more products. Italy gets 53. So the types of products, as far as where they go, let's just do the collapse to one nesting level. I can see where they wind up. Poland doesn't get a lot of different things from us. Only about 16 items. Same with Norway. Sell a lot of stuff to Venezuela. That's kind of interesting. So what's happening with that? Well, in that particular one, what we're doing when we are looking for the products that we have sold and wanting to find out about them, notice what's happening with this. What I'm doing is I'm actually starting from order details. I've identified this is the stuff that I want to get. I want to have the company name. I want to have the product name. And I have to group it by the country. That was the first pieces that I went and identified. And as I went and I looked at the relationship between these entities, I saw that this was the better starting point here because that was a good starting point because Order details is a good starting point because all of the crow's feet end up at this table, which effectively means that if I start at this table, I will have a one of relationship to the other entities. So each order detail is for a single product. Each order detail belongs to a single order, and each order is for a given customer who has a specific address. That's the way that that logic is going. Imagine then that we had another kind of a problem where they wanted to know about who are the customers that we have in the different areas. If we were to take all the customers, group them by their country and their region, where would our customers be? Where are all our customers? So here we can group by the row address, and notice once again I'm grouping by an object. So address is the navigation property. The navigation property, maybe I should do that in blue. The navigation property of .address is an object. It's a representation represents a table structure or row in another table. So that grouping by an object doesn't have to be an anonymous type. It can be, the actual address thing, which means that when I'm looking at the key, I could look at the key as a whole, which will give me the address, or I could look at the key and just show the country and the region pieces. So whatever you group by, it can be by either a single item or a complex item, in which case you're doing it by objects, and you can even do it by the address. Now, let's actually look at the results of this. So I've got the address in there specifically. I wind up not really getting, and because of how I did my select, I wind up getting only one single item in each list. If I look at the results, I can see this isn't exactly what I want. I want all the customers grouped by the country and the region. So if I've got France null appearing multiple times as the key information, then I've gone too detailed. By grouping by the row.address, I've gone too detailed. So this one isn't as good of a solution. So I can say this was too detailed. However, if I go by just taking the country and the region portion, then I actually wind up getting a lot better of a result. So now, if I were to find France in here somewhere, there were actually 11 different customers in France. So whatever you choose when you're doing your grouping needs to have an appropriate specificity so that you get it grouped by what they have actually asked for. If you cut the groups too finely, then all you get is individual items, which, by the way, is also a commentary on what happens if you take modern tendencies to divide people into different kinds of tribes and you make them more and more unique. Eventually you get down to the individual. But we won't get into discussions of societal things right now or any of those kinds of aspects. I could go there, but I won't. Okay, so what do I want you to do? I want you to use the remainder of this time to start working on your practices. So that practice part 1 and part 2 that's inside of your workbook. You'll get the remainder part of this class, so about half an hour to get started on that. When we come back on Monday, we're going to continue on finishing up our look at LINQ by checking out aggregate method extensions, ordering totals, doing those kinds of things, doing counts of stuff. I also want to go and show you some other LINQ extension methods, and hopefully we can wrap up a lot of the look at LINQ itself, and then move into doing stuff with our ASP.NET core applications. Thanks for tuning in. We'll catch you next week. Bye for now.